Hi, this is Lee Thurburn, and if you like this video, please subscribe and leave a comment. I love hearing from you. This video is intended to open a discussion on what our national policy should be towards China. As a nation, politically, we do not act as if we fully understand the serious existential threat that China represents to the United States. I believe that our national policy towards China should be updated. There are two reasons that President Nixon visited China in 1972 to open relations with China. One was to distance China from Russia and weaken Russia's geopolitical position while at the same time strengthening the United States' geopolitical position. The second reason was that the United States offered the carrot of globalized world trade and free trade, along with access to sell products into the lucrative United States market. To China was the hope that China would eventually move towards becoming a democratic and capitalistic political system. Instead of responding as we'd hoped, China took advantage of our generosity and worked diligently to supplant the United States, both economically and in military realms. Ideologically, China has not just continued to be communist, but has moved recently towards a fascist communist modality. China's brief flirtation with an open internal markets and capitalism is rapidly closing, and China is returning to a less open societal model. In the intervening years since the Soviet Union has collapsed and the new Russian Federation has become more aggressive in their internal posturing and policies, the time has come for generosity and patience with China and Russia to end. It is now time for us to play economic hardball. Recently, on Friday, October 7th, the Biden administration announced a series of export bans and other bans on semiconductor sales, both of semiconductors and equipment, as well as personnel services to China. This is a specific and direct attempt to undermine and thwart China's ability to use advanced semiconductors in the manufacture of advanced weapon systems. While I do applaud the move by the Biden administration in this particular instance, I think we should be doing more. Let me explain. Following are a list of assumptions that I think are obvious and really undeniable to anybody that's intelligent and informed. I'm certainly not the first person to express these observations. However, I think they need to be reiterated and reinforced so that they're brought to the forefront of our minds as we think about China, because they're important issues. Here are the assumptions that I'm putting forth. China, under the Chinese Communist Party, is an adversary of the United States. The CCP and the United States compete in ideological, economic, and military realms. The CCP seeks to displace the United States as the dominant power in the Western Pacific. China, under the CCP, is now in fact a fascist communist system that is ideologically at odds with the democratic, capitalistic system of the United States and most of the Western world. The CCP poses a serious present threat to Asian democracies such as Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea. As the leader of the Western democracies, and I think this includes Japan, India, and Taiwan, South Korea as well, the United States should send a very clear and unambiguous signal to the Chinese people. That signal is, we do not approve of the Chinese Communist Party. We need to let the world and the Chinese people know that we consider the Chinese Communist Party to be an ideological threat to the stability, the peace, and the prosperity of the world, and we will no longer provide a sort of safety valve for the failed policies of the Chinese Communist Party, nor will we enable aggressive and expansionistic ambitions. So how do we provide a safety valve for the failed policies of the CCP? And how do we enable their aggressive and expansionistic ambitions? Well, it's simple. We permit the Chinese people to purchase real estate in the United States as a way to sort of shift their personal wealth out of China, where it could be confiscated by the CCP. Every national government exists only with the permission of the people of that nation. This is true whether the government is a democracy or any other form of government. Now, history is full of examples of people changing governmental forms when they reach the point that they're no longer able to trust their current government. It is obvious that the Chinese people do not trust their government. The evidence is clear. As soon as any Chinese person reaches the economic station in life where they're able to afford to move a portion of their wealth out of the country and purchase real estate in other Western world nations, they do so. This chart shows that from 2010 to 2022, Chinese individuals purchased over 326,000 properties in the United States. The peak of that purchase period was 2017 and 2018, when over 40,000 properties were purchased each year. Recently, the purchase rate has dropped down to 6,700 in 2021 and 6,100 in 2022 so far. So why has it dropped off so much? Well, in part that's because of COVID and the problems with the Chinese economy, as well as the fact that China has attempted to crack down. The CCP has implemented ever stricter regulations about the transfer of Chinese yuan or currency outside of China, especially for the purpose of purchasing real estate. Now, the approximate value of all of the purchases, presuming an average current real estate value per property of about $350,000, is about $114 billion, which represents only 1/16% of the approximate $70 trillion worth of real estate in the entire United States. So what I'm about to propose is not a function of they own too much land. In fact, it's in our benefit that they don't own very much, because what I'm going to propose isn't going to be traumatic in any way, shape, or form to the United States real estate market. So while China has enacted laws to restrict the outflow of currency devoted to purchasing real estate in foreign markets, there are numerous ways to bypass that, the laws that have been developed. So recent declines in the purchases, again, are primarily a byproduct of COVID and lockdowns and industrial recession that China is struggling with. Now, I propose that the United States implement laws and regulations that specifically say that Chinese citizens and businesses and governmental entities may not purchase any form of real estate in the United States. This will have, again, a minimal impact economically on U.S. real estate prices, but it will have a massive psychological impact on the Chinese people. I further propose that we require any property in the United States that is owned by Chinese citizens or other entities must be sold within a reasonable time frame, something like 3 to 5 years. This would give plenty of time to allow divestment of the property that's owned without any economic pain to the owner or any trauma to the overall market. Finally, I propose that we codify into these new laws that these restrictions could be gradually lifted if and when the Chinese Communist Party implements democratic reforms that include the protection of personal property ownership, including real property and individual rights and liberties. Now, personal property ownership rights and personal rights and liberties are the legal foundation of a capitalistic economic system. So what I'm looking for is to encourage China to move in that direction. So how does this work? Well, my proposals will place pressure on the Chinese people to come to grips with the intolerability of living under a fascist communist government. They are so used to living under it and their lifestyles have improved so much over the last 50 years that they don't really, probably many of them, understand what the better options are. So removing the safety valve of permitting them to hide their money in the United States will actually force them to consider why they can't trust their own government to protect their wealth. Simply put, we need to encourage the Chinese people to put pressure on their government to change in the direction of democracy and capitalism. This change can only be achieved by an overwhelming desire on the behalf of the Chinese people. The change that I think we need to push for cannot be achieved with outside pressure. It has to come from within. So the goals that the United States and the West should have are, first, to slow, stop, and reverse China's growth in relative economic and military power vis-a-vis the United States and the West. I am not saying that we should push China into recession, but we should cause their relative power and growth to the Western world to be curtailed until we see these kinds of changes. Second, we should encourage the Chinese Communist Party to pivot their political and economic systems towards a more democratic, capitalistic sort of modality. This does not mean that they need to completely scrap the Chinese Communist Party system, but they need to begin the process of opening a plurality of decisions and options. They could start at the city or the provincial level. It doesn't have to immediately be at a national level, but there needs to be movement in the direction of democracy. Third, we need to dissuade the CCP from forcing the reunification of Taiwan by military means. This is critically important. Fourth, we need to accomplish the above points without coming into direct conflict with China in a kinetic military engagement, if it's at all possible. And then finally, we need to make it clear to the Chinese people that our actions are not directed at them, but rather at the Chinese Communist Party. Finally, I submit for discussion, consideration, and review a series of actions that I think form a sort of framework for how we deal with the Chinese Communist Party. First, there should be sanctions against China. Number one, this was actually begun on October 7th. We should prohibit or restrict Chinese companies' purchases of advanced technologies. I'm sure there are other technologies aside from just semiconductors that we're transferring that need to be reviewed and limited or eliminated. Second, we need to, like I said, prohibit future purchases of U.S. real estate by Chinese citizens or other entities. And then third, we need to require divestment of current U.S. real estate holdings by both Chinese citizens and companies. Now, the second major point is we need to impose sanctions on U.S. companies. We need to prohibit any company in the United States that seeks to provide products or services to the U.S. government or any political entity within the United States from having any sourcing for any products or services that they offer from within China by any subsidiary unit of any sort. And we need to give them time to make those adjustments. Also, we need to require companies to pay special taxes upon any portion of their supply chain sourcing that comes from China. They sort of value-added tax imposed specifically on the China production component of their products or services. Third, we need to impose sanctions against other nations, specifically nations that receive financial support from the United States should have limits placed on the amount of trade that they can source through China. Otherwise, special import taxes will need to be applied to sales by their companies into the United States market. And then finally, sanctions against companies of other nations, similar to the ones that are imposed on U.S. companies, should be applied. You know, you asked the question, would economic sanctions be effective? Well, the reality is yes, because 25.8% of Chinese exports go directly to either the United States or to countries who are politically and militarily aligned with the United States. Further, an additional 10% or more of Chinese exports are to countries who have a more significant economic and military relationship with the United States than they do with China. Now, a special note, the SWIFT banking system should not be used as a tool except in a last resort sort of situation. The United States should only terminate access to the SWIFT system if China actually were to become militarily aggressive against Taiwan or another democratic nation in the Western Pacific. All of the above sanctions that I've laid out are relatively high-level concepts and relatively generic. Imposing of sanctions can be divided into more specific industrial sectors and can be applied against even specifically targeted companies. Sanctions should all be announced with implementation dates so that there is an adequate amount of time for two things to happen. First, we should allow time for the United States and foreign companies to initiate alternative manufacturing and assembly facilities outside of China. And second, we should allow time for the Chinese people and the Chinese Communist Party to fully understand the ramifications of their strategic, economic, political, and military decisions that they make based upon the sanctions that I've listed. The goal here is to signal in advance that accommodations are being made to prevent catastrophic economic collapse within China and to allow time for the Chinese Communist Party to devise a prudent response. The United States should make the desired result, which is democratic and capitalistic transformation. We should make that well understood. It should be clearly communicated that sanctions can be eased and even reversed as China progresses in changing its behavior and rhetoric. When or if China takes concrete steps to move in the desired direction, appropriate revisions to or even removal of the sanctions should be considered and implemented. If you like this video, please subscribe, and I would love to hear your comments. Thanks for watching.